The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden streaks of light over Riverton's bustling downtown streets. People moved with purpose, some heading home from work, others lost in conversations outside coffee shops, while a few wandered leisurely, soaking in the evening air. The distant sound of a street musician's saxophone mixed with the murmur of traffic and the rhythmic footsteps of pedestrians on the sidewalk. Among them was Derek Carter, a Marine veteran in his mid-30s, who walked with an effortless confidence, dressed in a fitted gray t-shirt, well-worn jeans, and sneakers. He blended in with the crowd. Just another man going about his business. A leather messenger bag hung across his chest, resting lightly against his side. After months of deployment and intense training, Derek finally had some time to himself. The simple act of going to a bookstore, something so ordinary, so peaceful, felt like a welcome escape from the rigid discipline of military life. Tonight, he planned to pick up a novel he had been meaning to read and maybe even grab a coffee at a nearby cafe. For the first time in a while, his mind felt at ease. But that peace was short-lived. A police siren whooped briefly, breaking through the city's natural hum. Then came the sharp screech of tires skidding against pavement. A black and white police cruiser pulled up to the curb just ahead of Derek, its flashing lights casting erratic reflections on nearby storefront windows. Derek slowed his pace instinctively, watching as a stocky figure emerged from the driver's seat. Officer Bradley, a seasoned officer in his early 40s. Bradley moved with the calculated authority of a man accustomed to giving orders. His uniform was crisp, his belt weighed down with the usual tools of law enforcement, a radio, handcuffs, a holstered firearm. But what stood out the most were his icy blue eyes, which locked onto Derek with an intensity that felt predatory. "Hey, you," Bradley barked, his voice slicing through the evening air like a whip. Derek, already knowing what this was about, turned to face him. His expression remained calm and neutral, betraying none of the irritation that flickered beneath the surface. "Where are you headed?" Bradley demanded, taking a step closer. Derek met his gaze without hesitation. His posture was relaxed but firm, a quiet confidence exuding from him. "Just going to the bookstore," he replied evenly. His tone was neither defensive nor aggressive, just a simple fact. Nothing more. But Bradley didn't move, didn't blink. The air between them seemed to tighten, the familiar weight of unspoken suspicion pressing down like an invisible force. Bradley's eyes flickered down to Derek's messenger bag, his lips curling slightly as though he had found the very thing he was looking for. "That bag of yours, what's in it?" he asked, his tone shifting from casual inquiry to something sharper, laced with accusation. Derek exhaled slowly, already feeling the familiar itch of prejudice in the officer's voice. It was going to be one of those nights. The street, once filled with the sounds of casual conversation and distant car horns, grew noticeably quieter. A few pedestrians slowed their steps, their curiosity piqued by the tension crackling in the air. Others subtly glanced in Derek's direction before quickly looking away, perhaps recognizing the familiar signs of an all-too-common scenario. Officer Bradley took a step closer, his broad frame casting a shadow under the glow of the streetlights. His expression was unreadable, but his stance, rigid, authoritative, and unyielding, left little room for doubt. "Drop the bag," he ordered, his voice flat but laced with expectation. Derek remained still. He could feel the weight of the moment, the careful line he had to walk. React too quickly, and the situation could spiral. React too slowly, and it could be twisted into non-compliance. He had seen this before, he knew how this game was played. His expression didn't change as he responded, calm and measured. "Am I under arrest?" Bradley narrowed his eyes. "You're being detained," he shot back, his words sharp, almost rehearsed. And then came the lie, the predictable excuse wrapped in thinly veiled justification. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for." Derek almost smirked at the absurdity of it, but he held himself in check. There it was, the phrase that carried no real meaning, yet was used time and time again to justify baseless stops. No details, no specifics, just enough ambiguity to make it seem legitimate. Derek exhaled slowly, keeping his tone even. "All right, officer," he said, his voice steady but edged with quiet defiance. "Let's do this the right way." Bradley's eyes flickered, perhaps caught off guard by Derek's composure. He was used to people either panicking or protesting. But Derek was doing neither. Bradley reached for his handcuffs. His movements deliberate, expecting resistance. But instead of stepping back, Derek moved carefully, each motion precise and controlled. He reached into his back pocket, his hands slow and deliberate, making sure there was no way Bradley could claim he was reaching for something. He pulled out a sleek military ID and extended it forward. The words, United States Marine Corps, gleamed under the flickering streetlight, the golden insignia catching the officer's eye. For the first time, Bradley hesitated. The smug authority in his expression flickered. Just for a moment, his eyes darted from the ID back to Derek's face, as if reassessing what he thought he knew. And in that split second, Derek saw it. Doubt. The confidence in Derek's gaze unsettled him, shaking the unspoken certainty that this was just another routine stop. And in that hesitation, Derek knew. The power had already started to shift. The streetlights cast a pale glow over the growing crowd. What had started as a quiet standoff was now turning into a public spectacle. The murmur of onlookers grew louder, and more phones were raised, their cameras capturing every second. Officer Bradley's jaw tightened. He could feel the scrutiny, the shift in control slipping through his fingers. Scowling, he grabbed Derek's military ID and tossed it back with a flick of his wrist. "That doesn't mean you're above suspicion," he snapped. Derek caught the ID effortlessly. His movements smooth, calculated. He slipped it back into his pocket, his calm gaze never leaving Bradley's. "Then go ahead," Derek said, voice steady but edged with challenge. "Search my bag, but make sure everyone sees what you find." The statement hung in the air, its meaning unmistakable. The crowd leaned in, their eyes darting between the officer and the veteran. Some smirked knowingly, others whispered amongst themselves. A few in the front zoomed in their cameras, making sure they captured every moment. Bradley hesitated for half a second. He knew what was happening, the tables were turning. But instead of backing down, his pride pushed him forward. With a stiff motion, he unzipped Derek's bag, yanking it open as if expecting to find something incriminating. The moment stretched painfully long as he reached inside. And then, he froze. Neatly packed inside was a sleek, black laptop, a stainless steel water bottle, and a perfectly folded book, one that stood out against the leather interior. Bradley's fingers curled around the book, pulling it out. The title gleamed under the streetlight. Leadership Under Pressure. A Marine's Guide to Excellence. The officer's brows furrowed. He turned it over, flipping through the pages. "You wrote this?" Bradley scoffed, his disbelief barely concealed. Derek tilted his head slightly, watching the officer with an amused expression. "That's right," he said smoothly. A beat passed. Then he added, "Need an autograph?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone whistled. Another chuckled, shaking his head. Bradley's face turned an angry shade of red. He had lost this round. But Derek wasn't done yet. He crossed his arms, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Go ahead, officer. Keep digging. I'm sure you'll find something else that fits your suspicion." Bradley clenched his jaw, realizing too late, he was the one under scrutiny now. The crowd pressed closer, their murmurs growing louder as Officer Bradley continued to rummage through Derek's bag. The air was thick with anticipation, every movement captured by dozens of recording phones. Bradley's hands moved with frustration, yanking out items as if searching for something, anything, to justify his suspicion. But there was nothing, just a laptop, a stainless steel water bottle, and a small leather-bound journal. Bradley's fingers hesitated over the journal before flipping it open. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting, Derek's reflections on leadership, resilience, and justice. It was personal, thoughtful, and deeply introspective. And then one line caught his eye. "You don't fight for recognition. You fight because it's the right thing to do." The words hit harder than they should have. Bradley stared at them for a second longer than he intended. Something about them made his grip on the pages tighten slightly. His own reflection staring back at him in the glossy ink of the paper. Then, almost as if realizing what he was doing, he snapped the journal shut. He shoved it back into the bag and straightened up, his face flushed with irritation. "You're free to go," he muttered, his voice lacking the same authority it had carried earlier. Derek didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms, his expression unreadable, His calm, unwavering presence was a stark contrast to Bradley's unease. "Not so fast," Derek said, his voice even but firm. Bradley's eyes flickered with annoyance, but he quickly masked it. Derek took a step forward, not in aggression, but in commanding presence. He lowered his voice, but somehow it carried even further. "You accused me in front of all these people. Now, they deserve an explanation." The crowd erupted. Shouts of agreement rang out. "Yeah, explain yourself. What was the reason? You can't just walk away now." More phones were raised. More voices demanded accountability. Bradley's jaw clenched, his posture stiff. The authority he once held over the moment was slipping fast. Derek didn't break eye contact. He could see the cracks forming. And now, Bradley was the one being held accountable. A tense silence gripped the street, thick as a storm cloud before the downpour. The once chatty crowd was now laser-focused, their expressions shifting from curiosity to expectation. Officer Bradley stood frozen, his jaw clenched, a single bead of sweat rolling down his temple. The weight of dozens of eyes pressed against him, demanding something he wasn't prepared to give an answer. Derek took a step forward, his presence commanding without aggression. He held his ground, unshaken, his voice cutting through the thick air like a blade. "You said I fit a description." He let the words settle, giving them weight, forcing Bradley to stand in them. What exactly was that description? Bradley's lips parted slightly, but no words came, nothing to say, nothing he could say. The crowd leaned in, their anticipation growing. Derek's gaze didn't waver, his voice remained calm, but now carried a sharper edge. "Let me guess," he continued, his words slow and deliberate. "A black man walking alone, minding his business?" The air shifted immediately. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, quickly replaced by murmurs of anger. Some people shook their heads. Others let out a low, knowing sigh, as if they'd seen this exact situation play out one too many times. "Here we go again," a woman muttered under her breath, her phone still recording. A man near the front scoffed. "Same story, different day." Bradley's face burned. He stiffened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. But still, no answer. Because what could he say? Derek's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly, pushing the moment further. "This isn't about public safety, is it?" he said. "It's about power." The murmurs grew louder. Derek didn't stop. "You thought you could intimidate me." Another step forward, controlled, measured, unshaken. "But you didn't expect me to stay calm, did you?" Bradley's throat bobbed as he swallowed, shifting uneasily. The crowd was no longer just watching, they were waiting. Waiting for justice. Waiting for accountability. Waiting for a reckoning. And now, Bradley was the one on trial. Bradley clenched his jaw, his fingers twitching at his sides as he fought to regain control of the situation. The familiar power he wielded so effortlessly before was now slipping away. And he could feel it. His voice wavered slightly, but he forced out the words anyway. "I was just doing my job," he stammered, his authority cracking under the weight of public scrutiny. Derek tilted his head slightly, studying the officer. His expression remained calm, but there was something in his gaze, something unshakable, undeniable. "If this is how you define your job," Derek said, his voice low but cutting, "then maybe you're not fit for it." The crowd erupted. Shouts of agreement echoed across the street. "He's right. You don't get to walk away from this. Hold him accountable." Phones remained raised, unwavering in their focus. The flickering glow of screens illuminated the moment, capturing every second, ensuring there would be no rewriting of this narrative. Bradley's breathing grew heavier, his eyes darting between the expectant faces, the unblinking cameras, and the unwavering presence of Derek Carter, the man he thought would fold under pressure but was now standing taller than ever. And then Derek pulled out his own phone. He held it up, the screen already recording. His thumb hovered over the screen, ready to upload the footage with a single tap. "Here's the deal," Derek said, his voice carrying the kind of authority Bradley no longer had. The officer stiffened. "You either explain your actions," Derek continued, "or I make sure this video reaches every platform possible." The color drained from Bradley's face. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The crowd sensed his panic, and the energy shifted again, this time in full favor of the man who had been wrongfully targeted. Finally, Bradley managed to stammer, I was acting on suspicion." Laughter rang out, sharp, disbelieving, unforgiving. A woman near the front, her phone trained directly on the officer, shook her head and shouted, "What suspicion? Say it plainly." The pressure mounted. Bradley's shoulders tensed, his confidence crumbling in real time. Because now, the badge wasn't enough to shield him. The people weren't just watching anymore, they were demanding answers. And for the first time in his career, Bradley had no way out. Officer Bradley stood rigid, his pulse hammering in his ears. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the expectant eyes of the crowd, the unwavering lenses of recording phones, the calm but immovable presence of Derek Carter standing before him. This wasn't just a routine stop gone wrong anymore. This was a reckoning. Panic flickered in Bradley's icy blue eyes, a stark contrast to the steady resolve in Derek's dark, unwavering gaze. For the first time, the officer felt exposed. He looked at the faces staring back at him, some furious, some amused, some just waiting to see what he'd do next. Every single person here would remember this moment. Every single phone would carry his failure beyond this street corner. His hands twitched at his sides. His mouth felt dry. And then, his voice cracked as he forced the words out. "Look, I'll apologize," Bradley said, his desperation seeping through his tone. This was a misunderstanding. The words hung in the air, hollow and weak. Derek tilted his head slightly, studying the man before him. Unimpressed, unshaken, unmoved. He exhaled slowly before responding. "You didn't just inconvenience me." His voice was steady, firm, each word precise, deliberate, cutting. "You disrespected me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bradley shifted on his feet, feeling his authority crumble further. Derek wasn't finished. "And you disrespected everyone who's ever been harassed like this." A chorus of agreement erupted from the crowd. "That's right. Hold him accountable. Say it louder." Bradley flinched at the noise, his shoulders going rigid. He had never been on this side of the scrutiny before. The apology had failed. The people wanted more. Finally, his voice barely above a whisper, he muttered the only concession he could think of. I'll file a report on myself." Derek didn't react at first. He simply watched the nervous, twitching officer. Watched as the once powerful enforcer now struggled under the very same spotlight he had forced onto others. Then, with calm certainty, Derek responded, "That's a start." Bradley's breath hitched, sensing the underlying message. This wasn't over. Derek lifted his phone, tilting it slightly so the glow of the screen illuminated his face. "But this video? It's going to the precinct." Bradley's stomach dropped. "It's going to the media." His fingers curled into fists. Derek took a step forward, his voice low but heavy with finality. "People need to see what unchecked power looks like." The crowd roared in approval, their voices a wave crashing over Bradley's crumbling authority. And in that moment, the officer knew the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a warning. And his time was up. By morning, the video had spread like wildfire. Uploaded, shared, and reshared across platforms. It gained millions of views overnight. News outlets picked it up. Civil rights activists amplified it. And social media erupted in outrage. Officer Bradley's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Under public scrutiny, the department had no choice but to act. He was placed on administrative leave while an internal investigation dug into his past complaints, his history, his unchecked authority. But Derek Carter knew this was bigger than just one officer. One forced apology wouldn't change the system. One resignation wouldn't undo the damage. So, he kept pushing. Using the momentum, Derek spoke out against misconduct, calling for mandatory bias training, independent civilian oversight, and real consequences for abuse of power. His message wasn't just about exposing injustice, it was about dismantling it. And people listened. Weeks later, at a packed community forum, Derek stood before an audience larger than he ever imagined. The room was filled with activists, local leaders, and everyday citizens, people who had seen the video, felt the impact, and wanted to be part of the change. Derek took the stage. He scanned the crowd, seeing faces full of hope, determination, and fire. People who had been ignored, people who had been silenced, people who now refused to let this moment pass without action. He took a breath and spoke. "Today is not just about me." The room fell silent, hanging on to every word. It's about ensuring this doesn't keep happening. It's about the people who didn't have a camera recording. The people whose voices were drowned out. The people who never got justice. His voice grew stronger. Change doesn't happen because we hope for it. Change happens when we demand it. And it starts here, with all of us. A thunderous applause erupted. People stood, clapping, cheering, and raising their fists in solidarity. And as Derek Carter looked out over the crowd, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the fight. This was only the beginning. The end,